In today's video I show you how I created this beautiful frame mockup scene collection from start to finish so you can create and sell your own mockups. For this collection I'm using the so-called JSON prompting technique. JSON prompts are the ultimate way to gain control when creating and editing your images with AI tools like Nano Banana, and perfect for commercial projects like the mockup scene collection that I'm creating in today's video. If that sounds interesting to you, then please subscribe to my YouTube channel where I create these more slow-paced videos about how I use AI in my day-to-day design work. And your subscription would really mean a lot to me, plus it would help me grow my new YouTube channel. My name is Ruben Stom and I hope you enjoyed today's video. There are plenty of ways to put together a nice cohesive set of images for mockups. But because JSON prompts are becoming increasingly popular and because it can be a great addition for many projects, I decided to make this collection with JSON and show you how you can use it yourself. So JSON prompts are, simply put, a very structured way of writing a prompt. And using a very structured way of prompting gives you much more control when generating images with AI compared to writing it in natural language. So here's an example of what a very simple JSON prompt looks like. And although it may look a bit intimidating at first, it is actually very simple. And you don't have to know how to write it yourself, but it is important to know how to read it. The text parts that are nested within curly brackets are called objects. And these objects are groups of values that belong to each other, like the camera with its camera specifics. And within these objects you can find different values, and these values are for the user to adjust. For example, when I describe a sofa, I like to define the textures and the colors. You could write the JSON prompt yourself, but I like to let the AI model do that for me. And I do so by first uploading one or multiple images that I like into the Gemini chat. And next I ask the AI model to analyze the images and write a JSON prompt that would generate an image in a similar style. And then I tell it what I want to have included in the prompt, like the objects, the object colors, the textures, the lighting, the camera specifics, and so on. And what values to include depends on your project, and you can always add more later if needed. Something that I purposefully didn't want in my JSON prompt is a definition of the image resolution and the ratio. And the reason for this is that I use Nano Banana directly in Higgsfield to generate the image, and in Higgsfield you can set the image ratio and the resolution manually, which is also the main reason that I like using this website to generate images for professional projects like these. Because I asked the AI model to be very detailed, it outputted this really long piece of text. And the great thing of this text prompt being so detailed is that it will consistently generate almost identical images without adding any reference images. Now if I see something that I don't like, I go back to the Gemini chat and I upload the entire JSON prompt and ask it to make the changes to the prompt for me. For example, if I don't like the shape of the lamp that is hanging on the ceiling, I simply ask it to adjust the JSON prompt and add a square-shaped lamp instead. And it alters the JSON prompt for me, and when I upload the prompt into Higgsfield, it generates again a very similar image, but this time with a square lamp. And to make even more precise adjustments, I upload a reference image alongside with a JSON prompt. And this is really the ultimate way to gain control and to edit your images. Just to show you an example of how accurate this technique is, I asked Gemini to adjust another very detailed JSON prompt that generated this image. And this time I wanted to remove the artwork on the wall, make the bowl on the table white, and replace the pillow on the chair with a brown leather one. I then copied the rewritten prompt into Higgsfield and it adjusted the image perfectly. In this side-by-side comparison you can see it recreated the exact same image, but the only differences are the artwork, the bowl and the pillow. And it kept everything else exactly as is. So now that you understand how powerful a JSON prompt can be and know how to create your own JSON prompts, I apply the same technique to create multiple images in a similar style. So I basically just repeat the process of uploading the same reference images, ask for a detailed JSON prompt and alter the prompt until I end up with an image that I really like. And for this project it was very important that I kept a consistent look and feel, as I wanted to create a cohesive collection of mockups. And there are a couple of ways to achieve this. So for example, I used the same lighting for each image. And I did this by copying and pasting the same partial JSON prompt that describes the lighting. And another thing that I did to maintain a consistent look and feel is include specific textures and elements, like the wall frame panels and the dark face and the boucle textures on the furniture. And this is so that the viewer recognizes parts of one image within the next and ties them together as a set. I also specified the camera angle in my prompt, because I wanted a direct front view for every image, and this is because I'm using a single frame that is also in a front view, so the angle of the frame and the scene will match. I don't always add a JSON prompt. In some cases it's faster and easier to just ask for a simple adjustment. In this case, for example, I saw a part of the image that I liked and prompted for a close-up of the frame and some objects. And this would have taken me a lot longer if I had to create a JSON prompt first. Because the generated images aren't flawless out of the box, I retouch them in Photoshop. And I check each image carefully for things that I don't like. For example, the face has a weird looking part, and this is something that I remove with AI directly in Photoshop. I select the part that I don't want and I choose generative fill. And if you leave the text box empty, it will automatically try to remove the selected objects in your image. If you work a lot with AI, you probably know that text, especially when the text becomes very small, can quickly look botched. And when this happens, I remove it with generative fill and then add placeholder text as book titles. This doesn't have to be a fancy book cover design, as it will be so small that no one will even notice, as long as it looks natural. To make it blend in, I lower the opacity of the text and add a small Gaussian blur effect. I forgot to mention in my prompts that I always wanted the light to come from the right. So I had to flip some of the original images, and this is again important because I wanted to use a single frame within all the images so that the user can add multiple frames or move the frames within the scene. But it also means that the light in each image has to come from the same direction to match the frame. And speaking of light, although I specified the warmth of the light in my prompt, some of the results did end up a bit colder looking. And I adjusted that with a color balance layer, and I added some yellow and I decreased the blue tones. And lastly, I played with the level sliders to make sure that all images would match in terms of darkness. And here you can see some of the results after retouching them in Photoshop. So now that the images for the mockup collection are ready, I had to create the frame mockup itself. And this part actually took me the most time. I worked on this for like 4 hours before I got it exactly as I wanted. So first I prompted for a large 4x5 frame mockup on a bright light empty background. And the light comes from the top right, and this is important to make it match with the setting that I talked about earlier. And the wooden frame has a dark walnut brown color and a luxurious look and feel. The photo is a direct front view and there is no artwork. The frame is empty as it is a mockup. Here you can see some of the results, and although these frames look beautiful and are very unique, they didn't match the images that I generated earlier. The wooden frames were too thick and just looked off when placing them in a scene. So I tried again, and this time I prompted for an ultra thin frame, which resulted in this frame and was exactly what I was hoping for. The frame is thin, but still detailed and has that luxurious walnut brown color that matches with so many of the objects within the scenes. Although I prompted for a 4x5 ratio frame, Nano Banana still struggles with exact measurements. And this is something that I really hope they'll fix in their upcoming models, but that meant that I had to adjust the size of the frame manually in Photoshop. I start with creating a new document in a 4x5 ratio. I add a bright red background color and rename this, and this is just so that I can clearly see this layer later when I copy it over to the frame mockup scene. I create a smart object out of this document, and this smart object will become the placeholder for the user to insert their artwork. I copy the smart object over to the document with the frame, and I close the window with the smart object. Now that I have the precise measurements from the smart object, I'll match the frame with it. And this is actually very simple. I first set the smart object layer to multiply, and this will show the dark areas of the layers underneath. Then I match the bottom of the frame to the smart object. Next I duplicate the frame and I match the top of the frame. I add a mask to the top frame and I remove the bottom part by painting on the mask with a soft brush. Once I'm done, I merge the original frame and the frame with the mask together, and I now have a single frame with the correct size. Besides the 4x5 ratio, I decided to also create a 5x7 ratio frame because this is another very popular size for frame mockups, and I applied the same technique to resize this frame. I didn't like the drop shadows of the AI generated frame as it looked like the light came from the right instead of the top right. So I prefer a diagonal shadow, as this would better match the images that I generated earlier, and therefore I decided to create a shadow manually. I first cut out the frame with the pen tool. Then I added multiple drop shadows, and I always add multiple drop shadows as light bounces around and therefore creates different shadows. I slightly play with the intensity and the length and the angles of each shadow until I get something that I'm happy with. And this may seem subtle, but adjustments like these can make all the difference in realism in my opinion. The last step is to make the frame match the color tones of the scenes. And I use a simple trick for this to make the frame automatically match the scene by first duplicating the frame layer, and then I set the bottom layer to multiply and the top layer to 50% opacity. And this will make the frame blend in nicely with each scene. Whether the scene is somewhat brighter or has a slightly warmer color tone, the frame will match each time. And by adding a frame this way, the user can play around with the position and add multiple frames if needed. And this is one of those features that can really increase the value of your product and differentiate it from competitors. Here you can see the live version of the product, and for the thumbnail I always try to show as much as possible but still keep it legible when it is being shown as a smaller thumbnail in a search grid, for example. I've actually created a test grid where I can quickly insert a thumbnail to see what it would look like if it would be live on the Creative Market website. The next image is a short introduction to the product. I describe the product in 1 or 2 sentences with a clear example of what a mockup would look like in an actual use case. Then I add a full width image and I try to vary between different sizes and grids to keep things playful and interesting. And for each product I add a list of product features and what's included. And I do this because the viewer almost never reads the product description, especially on marketplaces like Etsy and Creative Market, where reading the description takes an additional step as you have to unfold it to read. And that's also why, before I start working on the product images, I write down what the most important selling points or pain points are. For example, I know that a lot of my customers don't have a Photoshop subscription. Therefore I want to include the message that you can also adjust the mockups with the free Photopea editor. And including this simple message has significantly impacted my sales over the years. I also clearly mention the most important product features, like offering multiple sizes and the fact that the frames are separated objects so the user can create their own scenes. And mentioning these things increase the perceived value. Even though a customer probably only uses one size, the fact that I offer an additional size means extra value. And giving extra is super important in a competitive market like digital design products. And that's what may persuade the customer to your products instead of your competitors' products. And pricing your product slightly higher becomes justified too. I end the product images with a short outro with a last real use case and then an overview of all mockup scenes that are included, and again to increase the perceived value but also to make clear what is included in the download. So that's it for the full workflow that I used to create my most recent frame mockup collection, and you now have everything that you need to know to create your own professional mockup collections with the help of AI. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and found it useful, and if you have any questions or suggestions for new videos, then please leave them down below in the comments and I'll make sure to answer them. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.